Important stuff. Okay, now we're recording. So yeah, our return of the holiday party that will be on Saturday, December 3rd at the new house, which I need to decorate and get a Christmas tree and all of that. So that will be happening. I'll send out some details about that. So put it on your calendar. And I'll let Maira in.
Or is it $20 white elephant?
Oh yeah, white elephant, which we'll explain and get back into again. It's been a while. This thing. Don't worry, we will get back into the swing of things. Then, so there's three major things I wanted to bring up before we get into the topic for today. The other is I sent to some of you the summary statement we got for the R21 that was recently submitted. This is the bilingual autism R21. So we had gotten something like $20,000 of pilot funds from the Center for Autism here to do that study. And then we submitted it to NIH and got those summary statements that are very positive and easy to address comments. So I'm going to resubmit that. The good news is that it will be easy to address. The bad news is it's due November 17th. So I have to do it like right away. So I'm going to do that this week. I'm going to finish the grant, send it around to people for comments. So please read it and see if it makes sense. If I didn't send you the summary statement and you want to be involved in the resubmission, let me know. But that's all I have to do from now for the next 2 weeks, because that's when the next deadline is. And if I miss that deadline, the next deadline is March. So I want to get that done. But the idea is that then if we get that R21, we'll have enough money to hire a lab manager, and that will really help us for recruitment and for doing that study. So in the meantime, what do you all have to do? So those of you who are in the lab and who are going to be scanning, please finish your scanner training before the end of the year. So get to Jared, book all the appointments. I know Charles is already finished. She's all the way through the scanner training. I think Jason, Priyanka, and Laura need to finish up. And then the undergrads, if they're going to be helping, then Jason is helping or getting them going. So try to finish your scanner training before the end of the year. And then I need to resubmit the IRB, because now the IRB has asked a bunch of questions and I have to change everything in it. So that's what I need to do for the next 2 weeks. So that's good. The other good thing is that I got a new job, basically, which is going to take up 20 or 25% of my time going forward, which is a lot of time. So basically, it's part of ABCD. They have this new position called Associate Director for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity. So I'm that person. It's going to take all my time. It's going to be hours and hours and hours of meeting every week. So what I'm going to do is try to reschedule things so that I already have most of my meetings on Friday, as you guys know, so I'm going to probably have to streamline that even further. We're going to have to move this lab meeting because I have meetings from 8 a.m. to 12 noon every Monday for this ABCD role. So we're going to probably have to move this lab meeting till 12 to 1:30 instead of 11:30 to 1. And then, of course, we're going to set a different time for it next quarter. So we'll do another poll for lab meeting and we'll do a different time starting January. So for now, yeah, it's going to be a good job. It's just going to take up a whole bunch of my time. So that's, hopefully we'll still be able to do all the stuff we do in terms of weekly meetings and lab meetings, but I'm just going to be more pressed. So that's the three sort of major announcements. Anything, Jason, I forgot? I think. Okay. So more details on all of that to come. Any announcements from the Zoom crowd? Anything new? I mean, I'll update us all on a few good things. Priyanka got her first paper accepted, so congrats. Autism research, and then Lauren finished her dissertation proposal, so congrats. I think a lot of people have been submitting things. Maira is going to be talking today about a submission. I know Zach is submitting his clinical internship stuff, so hopefully that's happening this month. Anyone else got any stuff you're working on submitting or anything you want to announce? Zach has a thumbs down. Come on, Zach.
I'm submitting a paper that you're a co-author on. It's just my.
Is your sound on?
Me now?
We can't hear you yet.
Now?
No, not
No.
yet.
I'll type it in the
I
chat.
can hear you,
You
Judy.
can type it. Yeah. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We can't hear you either.
Okay.
Oh,
It's on your
then
end.
something's going on
On
with
our
us.
end.
Okay, we can't hear you guys on Zoom. I don't know why.
Maybe the volume is
Is
down.
there anyone know where the? Oh, it's even the computer volume.
Oh, or that remote.
Yeah, let's see. This volume is up. And so it's something else. Is there a remote there? No, it's
Not on mute. It's not on mute
it's
now.
not on mute. What did we do last time? Huh. It was working before, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have an issue before. I don't even see a speaker here, so I don't even know what it could be. Well, do you guys want to type in the chat if you had something to type? So Judy says, I'm submitting my dissertation paper to brain behavior and immunity. Oh, great. Well, congrats, Judy. That's great news. More paper submissions. Zach, did you want to tell us something or type us something?
No, just trying to stay
Okay,
alive
well,
with.
we're gonna have to make do with no sound, but you can hear us, right? You can hear the presentation from here. Okay, so I'm gonna give Maira the floor so that she can tell us about her new grant proposal. I have to go to Charlie's dissertation thing at 1, so I'll, well, I think we'll finish before then anyway. Okay, so, all right, take it away.
Okay. All right, let me just. Oh, wait, you know what? My notes.
Let us know on Zoom if something is not, if you're not hearing or seeing, but she's about to share her screen, so let us know how that looks. Okay. Is that showing up okay for everybody? We can see it in the room. You guys can see it on Zoom? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
All right.
Great. All right. So, hi, everybody. This is my first time actually presenting in the BCCL lab. So thank you so much for having me. Today I want to present on a postdoc fellowship proposal that I'm working on, focused on puberty and neurodevelopment in ASD. And so specifically, I'm thinking of applying to both the F32 funding mechanism and the Autism Science Foundation Postdoc Fellowship Training Award. So I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of say that so that's at the forefront of everyone's mind. Okay, so since this is my first time presenting in this lab, I thought I would talk a little bit about my graduate research journey and the type of work that I've done. So I started here at UCLA back in 2017 in the adolescent development lab working with Dr. Andrew Fellini. And when I got there, I was really interested in actually looking at sleep and how it develops during the period of adolescence. And I focused on an understudied facet of sleep known as chronotype. So this is the idea that sleep timings are synced with our internal body's clock, the circadian rhythm. And what we saw in our data, which has been replicated in a lot of other studies, is that during adolescence, there's a shift toward being more of an evening type, where adolescents have later bed and wake times. And then there's a shift back in adulthood, back toward being a morning chronotype, which is also what children are. So this was some of my early work, sort of looking at, again, just sleep changes. I learned a lot of like multi-level modeling during this time, working with longitudinal data. And then in 2018, I was accepted to be a fellow on the T32 at UCLA, focused on brain and behavioral development during adolescence. So this is it's still happening actually, and it's co-instructed by Andrew Fellini, Mirella DiPreto, and Adriana Galvan. Actually, Lauren, you're a part of it, right? Okay, yeah. So you guys are very familiar with it. I was a part of the very, very first cohort, so I was kind of one of their guinea pigs. But during this time, I obviously learned a lot about brain development during adolescence, and we talked a lot specifically about the use of MRI in terms of mapping developmental change in the brain. And because of my sort of growing interest in adolescent brain development, Andrew, my advisor, invited me to be a part of a study looking at the neurodevelopment of prosocial behavior during adolescence. And in this study, which is still ongoing, it's a longitudinal study, we're looking at how adolescents give to other people and how this changes during that period, and how this specifically might differ depending on the people that they're giving to. So whether that be a family member, a friend, or a complete stranger. And so we're looking at how this changes and how it maps on with brain development. And so I recently had a paper with my very dear co-author, come out looking at the first wave of data from this study, where we see that adolescents increasingly give to family and friends as they age, which is pretty expected. And there's really no age association with how they're giving to strangers. And then we also looked at how this related to brain development in a few different ROIs focused on cognitive control, mentalizing, and reward processing. And so I think the sort of standout findings from this paper were just that regions associated with cognitive control, such as the DLPFC and the VLPFC, were both associated with giving over this time. And then to sort of expand on this work, my dissertation is now looking at empathy development during the period of adolescence, because empathy is a precursor to engaging in pro-social behaviors. So I was interested in how this was developing during the period of adolescence. And surprisingly, there's not a lot of literature associating empathy with brain development during this time. So my dissertation is sort of hoping to fill some of the gaps in the literature using this data set. So now I'm kind of approaching the end of my graduate career, and I'm looking to go on to a postdoc. And so given that, I'm also thinking about sort of different avenues of research that I'm interested in learning about that I sort of haven't really focused on during graduate school. And so that sort of brings me to my current proposal that I'm going to talk to you guys about today. So again, this is going to be a proposal for an F32 and the Autism Science Foundation postdoc training award. My sponsor and mentor is the wonderful Lucina, who's been just incredible in the short amount of time that you've gotten here in terms of mentorship. And I'm applying to both funding mechanisms because there's a huge overlap in terms of the application guidelines. And I think that this grant proposal would be sort of a good fit for both.
I think that's an important point, and it's great that you're doing that, because I often write one grant and then submit it to like 10 different things. And sometimes, so Jason had this experience where he got 2 things funded. It was like both an RO3 and an RSAT. And we were worried that it was like, oh, it's the same project. Are they going to fund them both? And when we talked to the program officer, they're like, it's fine, because it was like they were each 2 small grants. And so they didn't expect that anyone would fund the whole project. So I think that's a great point of just like always take your idea and fund it or send it around to as many places as you can. Because even if you get both, sometimes you can keep both, or worst case scenario, you can turn down one and keep the other. So good for you for shooting everywhere and trying, widen it.
As many as I can, hoping something sticks. But that's actually a good point too, in terms of thinking about like future studies when you want to fund something, like there's so many different components.
Send it everywhere.
Submit it everywhere. And so with all, I think, postdoc training fellowships, it's important to underscore the new training goals that you're going to accomplish during that period. And hopefully it's either kind of like an extension of the work you've done, or maybe like a new avenue that you haven't gone down before. And so for me, because I'd like to stay at UCLA, I also need to make a strong case for staying at the same institution. I don't know about the Autism Science Foundation, but I do know that like the NIH, for example, likes when you go to different institutions, and they kind of take a little bit of an issue with you staying at the same one. So I just need to make that case very, very strong. And then in terms of the NIH Institute for the F, I actually was curious to ask the lab, because I'm sort of newer to the world of autism research. Do folks go for NIMH, NICHD, NINS? Like I just was curious.
NIMH for autism stuff.
Okay,
NIMH.
always?
Not always, but NICHD tends to focus on like language related things. So I actually did submit the bilingual stuff to NICHD, but generally all of our stuff that's autism related has been funded by NIMH in the past.
Got it.
And I really like the program officer there who focuses on autism research. So I mean, that would be my suggestion. First pass NIMH.
Okay, got it. Great.
That also, you should look at the funding lines. Different institutes have different amounts of money. So sometimes, and also, you have to look at their website and see what the priorities are.
Right.
So I think your your stuff and our stuff tends to align with NIMH more.
Mhm.
But if you look at, they like list very clearly what they're interested in on their website. So
Yeah,
if it fits
yeah.
better with one of the others, great. But the program officer will always guide you and say like, oh, you're probably a better fit for this or that if you ask them beforehand.
Okay, got it. That's helpful. Yeah, I did take a look at their different priorities. That's why I was like, okay, NIMH seems like the right route, but I also am most familiar with NICHD. And then I saw that some stuff was funded by NIMS for ASD work. So I was like, I don't know. But okay,
NIMH
that's
has more
helpful.
money than, well, not always. It changes from year to year, but it's all
Okay.
on their website too. So
Yeah, it's all public knowledge.
yeah.
Okay. All right. So now going into the actual research proposal. This is very raw. I put together the slides pretty recently. So any suggestions, please feel free to throw them out there. Feel free to stop me. But okay. So adolescence, as we all know, begins with puberty. It has a very sort of obvious onset. And it's also a period of significant neurodevelopment, as we've seen with the increase in neuroimaging technologies and mapping brain development during this time. But also this is the time where we see the onset of mental disorders. So this sort of renders adolescence as an important time to look at what's happening in the brain, what's changing, and what might be leading to the development of different disorders. And puberty, more specifically, is, I think, a topic in adolescence that people are a little bit hesitant to study just because of the complexity of its measurement. But it's something that I'd love to get into in my postdoc work. So puberty, as we know, is the activation of the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, and this ends in gonadal maturation, or maturation of the sex organs. And this is a neurobiological process that involves the development of complex and interconnected systems across the brain and the body. And I was reading about puberty across the last couple of weeks, and I found this quote that I really liked, which is just that puberty marks the metamorphosis of a child into an adult. I really like that, very simple, but I think it nicely captures what's happening. And there's this really nice graphic that I actually found from Adriana Galvin's book about adolescent brain development, just sort of plotting what is happening across adolescence and mapping, the different pubertal stages with chronological age.
So the way they overlap, since I don't know a ton about the tender stages, is some people like either don't go through one stage or skip, right? Like it's not like everyone linearly goes through every stage. Is that the case?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the case. I think part of it too is like there hasn't been enough longitudinal work and enough EMA, I think, ecological momentary assessments to see that. But yeah, I think like it's not as linear as they're kind of showing it on the
That
graph.
makes it harder to like pinpoint like, oh, this person's at this and this one's at this, and how do you
Exactly.
compare? I mean, because
Yeah.
whenever I wrote a grant to do this like 5 years ago, and it never got funded because they couldn't agree on like the definition of and the measurement of puberty. Like nobody could agree.
Yeah.
None of the reviewers could agree.
Yeah. So it's complex. And so we have these different stages, the different Tanner stages that I think, folks might be familiar with. But then there's also these like two different phases that I think sometimes gets ignored. And so the first phase of puberty is known as adrenarche. And this is triggered by maturation in the adrenal gland. And gonadarchy is associated with maturation again of the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, sort of like onsetting puberty. And so this then results in the secretion of gonadotropin releasing hormone. These words are a mouthful, from the hypothalamus around 10 to 11 years of age. And so this triggers a rise in testosterone and estradiol, the really common hormones that we think of when we think of puberty. And it also results in the maturation of primary and secondary sexual characteristics, as well as menarche in girls. And then gonadarchy is the second phase, sort of following that like onset of puberty after like that initial phase. And I think this is the phase that's received the most attention in the literature in terms of just looking at how puberty affects brain development and behavior. But this early period has kind of been ignored a little bit. And that's why I'm kind of a little bit sad that ABCD doesn't include that earlier age, because I think it is missing on some pretty important pubertal changes that are happening. But at least we get those 9-year-olds. So maybe we're going to catch like the end of a genarchy into gonadarchy. Okay. And so there's been a plethora of work showing that puberty and brain development are both associated and they're interconnected. So here's some early work looking at just gray matter volume and how it's associated with estradiol levels in girls. And so this is showing actually a negative association with reduced gray matter volume associated with lower estradiol levels. And
wait, sorry, does that mean, as people get, what does that mean?
So, so I guess it just suggests that as I guess in this case, as girls are aging pubertally, there's lower gray matter volume. So it's kind of, I think, signaling sort of like development and potentially pruning, I would think.
So that finding is a general finding too, right? Like the gray development thinning in areas with age, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, I keep trying to go back. Yeah, so I feel like this maps on pretty well with like some of that really early work by Jay Geed looking at, gray matter volume and age. And actually, speaking of that paper, this is a graphic from there looking at the relationship between sort of volume of these different brain regions and its association with Tanner stages. And so you can see that, across adolescence and looking at all of these different brain regions, there are changes that are happening. They're not all uniform, which I think also complicates the story. But, all of these, there are a lot of changes that are happening during this time. And then this graphic here on the right is just showing that, there are also sex differences that are showing up. So again, just plotting what's shown here on the left, on the right, looking at sex differences. And so there's been a lot of work, I think, trying to argue that like sex differences also suggest pubertal differences, but I don't think that that maps on one-to-one as we see here as well. There are differences based on sex, but I think this makes the argument that, pubertal development is very different from sort of sex differences, despite there being sex differences in pubertal development. And then this is some work actually from Megan Herding's group looking at fractional anisotropy. So just looking at sort of how things are interconnected in the brain. And so I think here what they were showing was just, again, some sex differences and how that's associated with pubertal score and fractional anisotropy. So girls who are more mature were showing less FA, whereas boys who are more mature were showing more FA. So again, there are differences that are occurring both by sex and by puberty, but I think that there is enough work to show that these two variables are quite different from each other. Okay, and then just thinking about, again, more like network connectivity work, because I think this is the region that I'd like to get a little bit more into because I haven't done a lot of brain connectivity before. So I found some work looking at the association between puberty and default mode network connectivity and the central executive network. So here is some work showing pubertal and sex differences of the default of regions implicated in the default mode network. So we're seeing, again, so with females, kind of similarly to the result I showed before, females with greater pubertal maturation were showing less within network connectivity, whereas males with greater pubertal maturation were showing more network connectivity. And again, this is in the default mode network. And this graphic is showing results from the default mode network and the central executive network. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to see, but this paper is by Lauren Sherman and actually Mirella DiPreto here at UCLA, where they were just showing the association between puberty and brain network connectivity in different brain regions. So we see with greater pubertal maturation, there's stronger network connectivity in the default mode network and the central executive network.
In this one, the males and females went in the same direction. In the other,
In the graphic on the right, I actually don't think that they found sex differences. I'd have to go back and double check that paper. But the paper from the graphic on the left, they did. And then I was curious too about the salience network and looking at, what puberty or whether puberty is associated with connectivity in this network. And we do see that there are some brain regions that seem to be implicated, whereby there's, looking at the bilateral insula, there's more activation with greater pubertal development. And this is looking, I think, at a reward task. And then the graph on the bottom is showing less, I'm trying to think this is less caudate activation with greater estradiol levels. And this is in females. So this wasn't looking at any sort of connectivity, but the caudate and the insula are regions implicated in the salience network, and it does show some association with puberty or hormones implicated in puberty. So there's some evidence to suggest that these regions or this network is going to be associated with pubertal development. But for now, I'm kind of calling this preliminary evidence until I find more papers looking specifically at within network connectivity in the salience network and its association with puberty.
I missed the middle figure. So you're saying that the MN is different, or like male and females, and the CN is not, or
oh, sorry. Oh, this
Sorry,
middle
missed that.
one. Yeah, so this one actually, they didn't report on gender differences. This is just looking like across a group of adolescents. And what they found was that there was greater within network connectivity in the default mode network and the central executive network with greater pubertal maturation.
Clarification on maybe, did they control for age before they looked at pubertal development?
They did, yeah. They controlled for age to make sure that it was puberty over and above, the age effects. Yeah. Oh, any other questions?
it's hard because age is like always confounded with puberty, right?
Yeah.
Unless you get participants at the exact same age with different, but they could still be
With different
more
pubertal
mature.
stages, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Point is made there with that, the left graph too, that you can see the males span the entire spectra of puberty, where they don't launched, right? Because
At that age, right?
because of the age range that they chose.
Mhm.
Right.
Towards that pubertal.
that's age or tennis.
So for this first one, I believe that this was actually a pubertal development scale. So it wasn't the Tanner stages per se, but I do think the pubertal development scale is kind of influenced by the Tanner stages. Yeah,
They're
right?
relatively
They're-
matched together.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so my first, I guess, research aim or question would be to examine the association between pubertal development and salience network functional connectivity in typically developing youth to sort of establish, is there a connection there and what is happening during pubertal development within this region or within this network. And then to sort of expand on this work and to enter a research field that I have had a lot of interest in, but haven't really gotten into yet. I'm curious to sort of dive into autism spectrum disorder, which I'm sure everyone here knows is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects, language, social communication, motor behavior, sensory systems, etc. And so right now the stats are saying that 1 in 44 children are diagnosed with ASD. And this number is really, it's been going up, or I guess you could say the number is going down across the years, because when I was looking at some papers from Lucina, the stats that you were reporting were almost like 2 times this. It was like 1 in 80 something
yeah.
children. And I was like, oh my gosh.
It's crazy. The first
Um,
paper I published was in 2008 on autism, and I said like 1 in 250 at that time, and the numbers have
Wow.
have changed every year as far as
Yeah.
estimates.
Yeah, and so obviously there's a lot of speculation around why this is. It could be either because maybe there is really an increase in ASD, or perhaps we've just gotten better at sort of detecting ASD and diagnosing it earlier. And so given this, though, given that this number is, it's alarming and it's changing all the time, there's a huge reason to sort of understand what's happening during this time and study aspects of this disorder that have been understudied for a while. And so again, just showing some graphics that, there are deficits in social communication, sensory processes, and motor coordination in this disorder. And I found this nice graph just sort of plotting age with, this was age with the short responsiveness. Oh gosh, I think it was this social responsiveness scale. Thank you. I was looking, I don't think it's short in it, but I think it might just be because of ABCD. But yeah, the social responsiveness scale. So this was plotting, across age, typically developing and neurotypical and ASD individuals, and also splitting this up by gender, since there are gender differences here. So I thought that this is just a nice graphic to kind of show these differences in terms of how and when these symptoms are onsetting. So it kind of looks like really it's this early period before age 20 where you really see an increase in SRS scores. And so I also wanted to bring this up because the SRS is something that ABCD is measuring and is using to sort of look at ASD symptoms. So I thought this is nice and relevant.
Yeah, I didn't even see that paper, the 2014 one.
Yeah, I'll send it
Yeah.
around for those interested. And then I was curious actually if this group has heard of this Twohit model of ASD. Is this something that
I've heard of
folks
it.
are familiar
but
with and agree with?
It's funny, it's interesting. I've heard of it and I've read about it, and it's not like pervasive in the autism field, but I think it's an interesting model.
Yeah, it came up, during my search of just looking at, ASD and adolescent development. And this paper sort of argues that adolescence is kind of this second hit in the developmental period, where things can just go wrong from worse to even more wrong. And so what they say is with this Twohit model is that, there are genetic or maybe environmental prenatal disruptions that then result in a neural system that shows altered sensitivity to different activational processes during puberty. And then this results in like a second biological hit of autism because of this interaction with potentially like these changing hormones. So I think that this kind of also begs the question of like what is happening hormonally during this time that might be rendering adolescence, a period of increased susceptibility for youth with autism, with ASD. Actually, I just want to pause. Has anyone else heard of this Twohit model? You have?
I think one thing that I continue to be confused by it, and maybe you can elaborate on, is the second hit. Are they saying that there's biological components that are then interacting with environment in the second hit as like a second time that cause additional disruptions, or is it that there's just environmental, or are there just genetic components or just environmental factors occurring at the adolescent stage? How are they teasing all that?
Yeah, I think it's the first part of what you said. It's really just that there are the genetic and the environmental stressors kind of interact during that time, along with increased hormonal changes and all these other susceptibilities that then render it like a more vulnerable time for worsening symptoms. That's kind of their or not their argument, but what they're trying to say, I think, with this model. Yeah.
You could argue that with much of mental health.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't know if this is like a really like hard-hitting idea, but yeah, it's definitely a model to work with, I think, but yeah, I was just curious what folks thought. And then, of course, I think I don't need to preach to this group the importance and the relevance of the salience network in ASD, particularly during adolescence with, work from this lab showing hyperconnectivity during adolescence in the salience network.
I guess this was 7 to 12-year-olds, so that's maybe not the full age range that you're thinking of, but that's what this was, 7 to 12.
Okay, got it. So it's 7 to 12, so I guess a little bit younger. But I'm thinking potentially with the data set that I want to work with, I think that this should still work. And potentially, I mean, right now I'm hypothesizing at least that like this work would be informing my hypotheses of what I think I would see during this age. Okay.
Yeah, we just talked about this last week in Lauren's defense about, or proposal about how Morella's group is collecting, basically infant data, and they are able to like detect salience network in like whatever tiny infants. So,
Yeah.
so you can definitely like see these things at different age ranges. So it's definitely plausible.
Yeah. Okay, and then yes, so there's this paper that came out pretty recently, actually. It was from 2021. So this is obviously following your grant proposal. And this is just summarizing, brain-based sex differences in ASD across the lifespan. So it's a systematic review of a lot of different brain measures. And so one thing that they do talk about is just that, there are higher rates of hormone dysfunction disorders that are observed in ASD, which I actually didn't know myself, but I'm starting to look into it more now. But I think that this sort of, and they say this as well, that this sort of renders a strong argument for looking at what's happening during puberty.
There's also high
in
rates
these
of sleep
individuals.
disruption in autism.
Yes, I was going to get to that too. Yeah. So there's high rates of sleep disruption. So then that also begs the question of like, are those related? And so there's some evidence in the typically developing literature that, pubertal stages and hormone levels are related to sleep. But it's very messy data as most puberty work is.
Do you know anything like with health as well? Could like body weight, or because there's like often more health difficulties in adolescents and autism too, high rates of obesity.
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't really thought about that, but I that's maybe something important, I think, to consider. What other variables would you recommend?
Right now it's like whatever is available. So for sure BMI, but there's better things to look at. But I was just curious because like with all the different health things that are going on too, and like how that might impact hormone. That's
a really good point. Yeah, I would wonder if it like moderates those associations or something like that.
Jumping off that thought, there's certain genetic mutations or changes that we know cause an autism spectrum phenotype, right? But there's a ton of kids with autism spectrum and adults. We don't know that there's a genetic or a chromosomal change or difference. And so I'm curious about like your approach if you're going to be using individuals who we already know have a genetic change in the makeup, which could be influencing their pubertal hormonal levels and everything else. Or if you're going to use a group of individuals we don't know what that if and where potentially those kinds of genetic contributions are coming from.
Yeah, right now, my plan just are, jumping ahead, it was actually to look at this in ABCD data. Because it's available and because I think if we can leverage that data and create, look at some early results, that might give more precedent for them like funding some of this work to then, look at genetic biomarkers and things like that and really like properly diagnose these individuals and potentially like discern the different pubertal stages that they're at as well. So right now I was thinking of looking at this in ABCD, which is I wanted to clarify too, I think it's just like a typically developing sample and they do screen for like different disorders, but they do, they have the SRS measure. And so my plan was to look at, associations with symptom severity on that. And sort of see if there's anything there, and then try to go and look into like a more ASD based population. Yeah.
I think it's worth looking into, not to get too deep dive into ulterior the dark holes.
Go for it, yeah.
But I do think it's worth taking a look at some of the literature of the known of those whose known genetic mutations or changes result in a phenotype that is representative of ASD, and just to see and currently we don't have amazing sets of data for this in the literature. We're talking about like maybe 100 people at most in these samples, but it starts to give us, like, there are a few out there that are looking at pubertal development and how that's different in these individuals, and so it can start to give you a little bit of a window into like that range and in comparison to this development.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful actually in terms of, I'll definitely go check out that literature because I feel like that would really inform some of the background that I'm trying to write up right now.
And certainly don't go like too deep into it.
Yeah,
I've gone that route before,
right,
for that, but
yeah,
there's a little bit out there that
yeah,
certainly give you like essentially the like, do I want to call this genetic or that environmental?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. It's really helpful. Okay, so I guess my point with this was just that this paper really argues and talks about how there are no studies to date that have looked at the influence of hormones on adolescent ASD symptoms or comorbid condition progression in ASD. And so this kind of leads me to what I would like to look at. Oh, and my argument here too is just that, sex differences are not pubertal differences. And so that's just something to keep in mind that, these two different variables do really produce different effects. Sometimes they're hard to parse apart though, of course, because there are sex differences in puberty. But right now, I think our only understanding of brain-based or of brain development during puberty in ASD is based on sex differences. And so I don't think that that's enough right now. Okay. All right, so my second research aim is just to examine the association of pubertal development and salience network functional connectivity in youth with ASD symptoms. And then jumping to what Lucina had pointed to earlier was I am curious about the moderating role of sleep here. So it's pretty well established that individuals with ASD have, pretty not so great sleep. And there's quite a bit of work to show this. Here's sort of one recent article I thought that was nice and kind of related to some of the variables that I'm interested in the ABCD data set. But then there's also some preliminary evidence to suggest that, there is an association between brain network connectivity and sleep, particularly in individuals with ASD. So this is one study that was looking at fatigue symptoms, looking at both healthy controls and individuals with ASD. And then here's another study looking at brain network connectivity showing that, there's poor sleep quality associated with less connectivity in individuals with ASD. This specifically was looking at the default mode network. There hasn't been a lot of work looking at this in the salience network. So again, I thought that this is a good reason to look at that particular network. So for my third aim, I'm interested again in just looking at whether sleep moderates the association between pubertal development and salience network functional connectivity in those with ASD symptoms. So again, because this is a fellowship proposal for a postdoc, I do have to emphasize what my training goals are. So here I've sort of outlined the specific goal training that I think I'm going to get from each of these sort of research aims. So for the first one, I would gain expertise in salience network architecture and function. That's sort of a network that I haven't worked with before. And I would learn new measures of neural connectivity since, neural connectivity isn't work that I've done before either. And I would hope to build knowledge of different types of puberty measurements as well. And then with my second aim, here I would really hope to develop an understanding of ASD development in the age and population of individuals that I'm going to be looking at. And with my third aim, I would hope to deepen my understanding of sleep abnormalities in ASD and in the development and progression of symptoms of ASD. And so quickly, the method here would again be to look at data from the ABCD study. I'm not going to go into the methods because I know a lot of you have heard about this study a bunch of times. But the different variables that are available to me, or measures, I should say. So first, starting with puberty, there's the pubertal development scale. And this is a self-report scale for individuals in the study. And then there was salivary hormone measures. I believe that this is only for a subset of the population, though. Does anyone know if that's true? Yes, it is. Okay. So it's only in a subset of individuals. So my thought was, I don't know if I would write this in the proposal because I might get too messy, but my plan in terms of analysis would be to look at both of these measures of puberty, especially since the hormone measures are only in a subset of the population. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry.
No, go for it.
Looking at the concordance between pubertal development scale and salivary measures.
Yeah.
Also really supplement well, like anything found in either direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely love to do that too. Part of me is like, I feel like someone will probably beat me to that, just in terms of looking at the concordance. But if they don't, I would definitely want to do that, especially in any analyses that I do, just to see, how overlapping are they. Another thing too about puberty that I was taking like a little pause to think about is there are different, again, there are different measures of puberty, but there are different ways to conceptualize it too. So there's either like pubertal stage, so that's like whatever stage of puberty you're at. There's pubertal timing, which is like what stage are you at relative to your same age peers. And then there's also pubertal tempo, which is like how fast have you progressed through puberty. So I'm also like toying around and playing with the idea of looking at some of those different measures, but I think it will just depend on like how much ABCD data is available at that time.
So do you know Jen Pfeiffer?
Yeah.
Were you there when we did that puberty talk for the methods class last year?
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Go back and watch that again if you can, because she had a whole, or I can ask her for the slides, but she had a whole bunch of things to say about how to get the measurement. I mean, I guess there's not agreement, but at least you can, decide based on what the field is doing. But yeah, I was kind of like blown away by that presentation because I didn't realize there were so many different ways of thinking about puberty. And it's hard when nobody agrees.
I know, and no one agrees, and there's too many different ways to look at it. And it's like sometimes I think depending on the measure, you might see like different directions of associations and different genders, so it can get very confusing.
There's also, more autism traits in males than in females. So, there's that 4-to-1 ratio in diagnosis. I don't know about if you even just look at the SRS across the ABCD, if you see like, that maleness, there's all this like extreme male brain hypothesis of autism and all this stuff.
Right.
So I wonder if you'll see it just in the even non-diagnosed. Oh, there are also diagnosed people who end up in ABCD. So that's another like wrench or something.
But I guess I was going to ask you like, but those aren't individuals who like, okay, what was my question there? I guess my question there was, they're not diagnosed based on the measures in ABCD, right?
No.
They're diagnosed like separately outside of
Because
the
they don't
study.
do ADOS and stuff as
Right.
part of ABCD, but they also don't exclude people, I believe.
Once they've been recruited.
I mean, I don't remember if they explicitly exclude autism diagnosis. I don't think they do exclude it.
Okay.
So that means like you could have people in the sample who have an autism diagnosis, unless
Okay.
I'm mistaken.
If that's the case, I did see one study that had, at least in like the baseline sample, I think had found like 157 individuals who had ASD. But when I looked at the measure, it looked like they were just looking at the SRS. And I was like, I don't think you can't like use the SRS to say, so I need to like double check, but I'll go back and do a little more deep diving into.
Yeah, I know it's not part of the ABCD protocol to do ADOS and stuff like that, but I don't believe that they excluded anyone with the diagnosis.
Yeah, and the CASATS, the full CASATS version does have a section for autism spectrum diagnostics,
yeah.
but I don't know if
They're not doing
the
the full-
version that ABCD.
I don't think
used.
they are. Yeah, I like it, saw it like kind of in the data dictionary, but then another website didn't have it. So, but I don't think that they did. I think it was just the SRS, if I'm not mistaken, for ABCD.
Yeah,
It's about
But-
half of-
well, this is what,
half of
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Did you happen to see the letter? I was curious.
Yeah.
And maybe because are you submitting this? soon?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Very
I'm just curious, like, what are because based off the Twohit hypothesis, if you're gonna talk about that, I was just curious, like, do you know how many are like newly diagnosed in adolescents with like autism or
yeah.
kind of like,
Hmm.
is there any literature like they were to be diagnosed and then
That's true.
Very often, like a, there's large peak of that age 3 of most
Mhm.
kids getting diagnosed. with
Yeah,
around that
the main
age. But then,
for-
then like late childhood, early adolescence is another hump.
Is there another hump?
Yeah.
Really? Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I'll just look
good
at the
to
letter,
know.
because that would be, it'd be nice to see that type of graph. I'm just
But
like,
there is something with sex differences that are quite tricky, right? Because like females
Yeah.
are more likely to miss, so then they'll like get diagnosed later, just because they like
Mhm.
they can like present more socially
right,
normal.
right, right. Or like internalize. a little
Yeah,
more.
just. that's
Yeah,
really cool.
no, that's a, I'm just gonna make note of that there, because I'd love to go see if there's like a graph.
Yeah. Or I just imagine like the weird.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
Yeah, for sure. I was asking actually my mom, because she's a adolescent psychiatrist who specializes in autism spectrum disorders. And so it's like, are there like, do you diagnose a lot of teens? And she's like, no, like no, I haven't in my practice. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm just like overthinking that adolescence is like a hump, but I would be.
The neuropsychology.
Okay,
Good to know.
Yeah. Wow. What age, like, is it early adolescence where you see, or is it like mid?
And some of them only met criteria for like a pervasive developmental disorder, but like it was very clear that like they had been socialized not to do those repetitive behaviors in the classroom anymore. So like if they were still doing them in the classroom, they need criteria for ASD, but they don't.
Right.
So they socialize against it. So
Yeah.
now it's not ASD. So like there's lots for
Interesting.
I mean, the brain. Could be.
Okay, let's see, and then. almost there. And then in terms of looking at salience network connectivity, I didn't realize this, but there's at most 20 minutes of resting state data. And
Well, it's like 5, 5, 5, 5, I think.
Yeah, it's like 4 different
Mhm.
runs of 5 minutes of resting state. And so they do, I think, like the first 2 toward like the beginning of the session, and then the latter 2 toward the end of the scanning session. So it's possible, the last 10 minutes were cut off, but I think that nonetheless, that's hopefully quite a bit of resting state data that we'll get. And like I've said, I'm not really well versed in like the network connectivity world, but this is really where I'd hope to develop my skills in my postdoc, learning from you all about how to measure this. And then the ASD, in ABCD, as I mentioned before, ASD was indexed through the short social responsiveness scale. So I believe it was actually only 11 items, and I keep trying to go and find like the exact measure. I might have to ask Christina, like, can I see like the questionnaires you guys send out?
I didn't know they did a short one. That's too bad.
Yeah, I know. I thought that was too bad too, but I did find like some of the measures or just the items in case people were curious about what those were. But it looks like they asked a variety of binary and continuous measures. And then for sleep, although I'm not well versed in this measure, this is another area that I can learn about. They use the sleep disturbance scale, which is not something I personally have used before, but I think that it's something that is well validated for parents to complete for their children. And I think that they chose to do this to kind of like reduce the burden on, the number of questionnaires that the adolescents or the youth had to complete. There is, I think, some obviously evidence to show that parents are not the best at assessing their children's sleep. So there's that caveat, but this is a measure I think that they have been taking since baseline. So this is something that I could look at sort of across hopefully a year or 2 at least in the data set. And then there are some other measures, like I think that they ask sleep quality through the PSCI, the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. There's also like Fitbit data, actigraphy data, and I've worked with actigraphy data before. That's more of like an objective measure of sleep that you can capture using wristwatches. But again, some of that data is only on a subset of the sample. So kind of need to make decisions of like what measures do I want to look at that are in the whole sample versus which ones do I want to look at that are just in a subset of the youth. And then just lastly, thinking about my hypotheses. So with my first aim, I'm hypothesizing that pubertally mature adolescents, or more pubertally mature adolescents, I should say, will have stronger salience network connectivity. And within those among those with ASD symptoms, I'm predicting that those with more pubertal maturity with ASD symptoms will have stronger or hyper salience network connectivity compared to typically developing youth at the same pubertal stage. And then lastly, with my aim to look at, a moderation of sleep, I'm predicting that adolescents who are more pubertally mature with more symptoms of ASD and poorer sleep will have stronger salience network connectivity compared to typically developing adolescents. So the idea being that the poor sleep is really exacerbating that hyperconnectivity that we see in aim 2.
I can't even remember if there's a longitudinal study of salience network development in adolescents. I don't even think that basic question is there. I don't know, Jason, if there's any papers on like adolescent longitudinal, like, network development.
Not longitudinal, just cross network or cross.
Maybe there's cross-sectional.
Cross-sectional.
Kathleen Lawrence, doesn't she have one longitudinal ASD paper?
Oh, in Maira's.
Yeah, because they collected some longitudinal data.
It's a good question. I just can't remember seeing it. Maybe it's there.
Maybe actually you're right.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember that.
Okay.
Her looking at puberty.
Okay.
Because she had one of the few longitudinal sets.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, you were saying, Lucina, just that there isn't like a lot of work looking at salience network development and typically developing youth
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, there might be a few, but I can't remember what the findings are
Yeah,
at the top of my head.
That's kind of what guided like my
Mhm.
aim one, and that's sort of why I wanted to start there, because I feel like there isn't a lot of work, like
Right.
there's a lot of work looking at default mode network
Right.
connectivity,
Right.
central executive network, frontoparietal net, like there's a lot of other networks, but surprisingly, the salience network has not been looked at despite the different regions being very active during, throughout
Right.
adolescence.
The one I can think of that Shruti in our lab did a few years ago, it's a neuroimage paper that looked at all the networks in the NKI data set. So that was the 6 to 85-year-old range.
Mhm.
And she found like the spatial topography of the salience network was like reduced with age across that across the lifespan. Let me just send you that paper. And there's a few, and maybe that paper has references to others.
Mhm.
But yeah, I can't, off the top of my head, I can't really remember what the general trends are even.
Yeah,
So
All right, I'll check- yeah, I'll
this
check
is a
that paper
2018
out.
paper I'll send you.
okay. All right, and then lastly, just, some suggestions. I don't know how much time we have, but just in terms of thinking about the background literature organization, I wanted to get, people's thoughts on whether this sort of order that I've done makes sense, where, I'm talking about puberty and brain development and typically developing youth, and then looking at puberty and brain development in individuals with autism spectrum disorder or like increased symptoms of ASD, and then talking about the moderating role of sleep. So I wasn't sure if this sounded good, / I was a little hesitant just for the Autism Science Foundation, like they did say that they're open to some more basic science questions. So I was hoping that this kind of counts as a little more basic science in that sense. But I wasn't sure if starting off with like the typically developing first, I don't know, was setting myself up for failure in some way.
I mean, I think it makes sense because if you don't know what's happening,
Right.
then it's hard to
Yeah.
compare.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely for an NRSA, this will be good. And we have never successfully applied for funding from ASF. Like every year, someone in the lab submits.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't remember what topic you submitted. Was it the infant?
It was a bit,
I mean,
Was it for a
toddler.
pre-doc?
Yeah, it was a production one.
Yeah.
I prefer people who are like, they don't want
I don't know what they want.
Do you get review, like
You don't get-
comments?
Yeah,
Oh, you do
I
get
I
reviews.
did, I haven't. Because I had like, we
Yeah.
submitted a couple others right
Yeah.
after.
Yeah, I'm curious, like what they're, what do they want?
Yeah, did they make comments?
Yeah, I just need to go through them.
Oh, can you send it to me? I don't remember what they said, but I need to see what they actually care about, because if that'll help us like in the future, because I don't know, I'm trying to remember who else in the lab has submitted, but basically like every year somebody submits something and we've never gotten one. for
Yeah.
Autism science, but
Yeah,
I mean, there's a first time for everything.
yeah, and I think it's good practice, so.
Yeah.
And then I was, just curious about whether I should only talk about one measure of puberty
Oh,
in
yeah.
the grant application, and this just kind of goes for like, more generally, like, as you know, Lucina, you've mentioned to me a few times, like, only talking about what makes a tight story for a grant versus like, what are you actually going to end up analyzing?
Well, I think you should focus on one measure, but you should have a lot of like a paragraph about like, here are different measures. Here's what ABCD collects. I've picked this one because they need to know that there are multiple measures, and they need to know that there's controversy. So I think to do the study, it's helpful to just be like, here's the one I'm going to use, but to like make sure that you've spelled out your, knowledge of the issues.
I would choose the NRSA one. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's also a section, or I don't know if everyone has a section, but you should put it in of like, what happens if
Limitations.
limitations, like essentially what you do.
Alternatives. That's what.
If they-
Like alternative,
right.
yeah, like alternative outcomes.
Right.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that is where you can specify like, hey, I do know that puberty is a hard thing to measure. And we've
Right.
got lots of different options.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
okay, I like
alternative
that,
strategies section.
There's so much data.
There's so much
So much
data,
stuff.
I know, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, let's see. Oh, yeah, and then just suggestions. I'd love papers, if people could send them my way that discuss different ways to measure neural connectivity and resting state fMRI data.
Well,
I'd
if
love
you're
to,
just focusing on within salience network connectivity, it's a different thing than if you're looking at like network interactions and
Mhm,
stuff like that.
mhm.
So I guess it depends on like what, if you want like the network itself versus like the network and its role in across other.
across other
know,
networks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know, I guess part of me would be curious just to start within network,
Mhm.
because I feel like that would be like a good place to start, and then maybe eventually expand to looking at how it interacts with other networks and other regions.
That'd be, again, a good place, good part for the
Alternative.
Alternatives, yes, yeah.
I mean, the easiest thing to do within network is the sort of like dual regression approach. That's like super easy.
Mhm.
I can send you like Jason's first paper where we did that, but if you want to do anything more complicated, you obviously could.
Yeah,
Sort of up to you.
okay.
We can, yeah, we could talk
We can
about it.
strategize. Okay, I'll start in the simple stuff, and then I'll kind of go from there.
Mhm.
Oh, and that's it, actually. Thank you. Thank you all for your attention and for your thoughts and comments. I'm going to be working on this for the next several weeks. So if you have any thoughts or come across papers or have ideas, please send them my way. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to working with you all. And I hope that one of these gets funded so I can stay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Congrats. So yeah, we can definitely come up with more interesting analyses. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of, there's already sort of a lot in there. So
Yeah.
if you put too much crazy analyses, it might be, how long I know that NRSA is like 6 pages. How long is the autism one?
It's roughly the same. I think it might be like 8 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's my only thought is like, I don't want to like overdo
Right.
it, because then I might get a comment that's like, she's trying to do too many different things.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, what do you want from me?
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
yeah, because I did apply for an F31 and just got like, I think like screwed over with like different reviewers both rounds who all found different things to harp on. So
Yeah. That's how it always is. Yeah, you like fix one thing and then they harp on something else.
yeah. But it's obviously just like the name of the game. But yeah, thank you all very much.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I get the most frustrated by the pubertal development literature in general is there's so many linear regression stuff.
That's all
And
it's
like,
done, really.
right, and like
Yeah.
you presented plenty of evidence that it's
Yeah.
not linear.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And this is probably only gonna make it into like the level of implementations alternative.
Mhm.
But even just being able to go beyond a linear regression and maybe some data that would be
Right. It's true.
Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I actually do that. You should turn it.
No, you should highlight that in
Like,
the, where's it, the innovation
The
section?
innovation,
Be like,
yeah.
first time.
First time, I looked at non-linear.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Think of it as a whole slope.
Yeah, exactly, especially with the type of measures we have.
Yeah, it's just a lot to think about. So I'll give it a think through, but I think it's a good idea. It's novel and innovative and, no one has done it. No one is working on it because it's difficult. So
Probably have my work cut out for me, and I'm hoping that it's like different enough from the work that I have done,
Mhm.
that they won't mind my wanting to stay here.
Oh yeah, those are the things you have to sort of point out, like you have to say like, I've only done task fMRI or.
That's all I've done, yeah.
Exactly. And then that's why this is totally a new training.
Yeah.
So yeah, and how like, you haven't ever, let's say, I think you haven't worked in clinical population.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. so
Yeah,
those
I've
are-
only done like typically very
Right.
basic science, clinic, like typical development stuff.
Okay, so this is your first like
Yeah.
foray into clinical translation. They love it when people like do something clinical for the first time as far as training. So that is something you can learn. It's like, yeah, they're like, oh,
Yeah,
Yeah, they love it.
but yeah, and I haven't seen any papers come out from ABCD
Yeah,
on ASD, please send them my way too. Be curious about those.
and you have to just say autism traits because you won't have the diagnosis.
Yes, I literally was just thinking about that this morning. I was like, I gotta change that.
Right, it just all has to be autism
traits.
traits, and
Yeah.
then, it has implications for the clinical stuff.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, with the ABCD data set, like. Think about who goes into the sample in the first place.
Mhm.
You're not gonna get most of the wide range of what
Right,
ASD is.
100%.
You'll get
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
high functioning,
Yeah.
right,
most fewest traits.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any other data sets, I guess, like looking specifically at those with ASD that have also measured pubertal development?
That's the problem. I mean, so abide obviously is just resting state and a few measures, but not puberty. NKI, I don't know if it has puberty, probably not, right? And it doesn't really have ASD diagnosis.
There's a guy in Europe that does a lot of autism traits in the typical population.
Uh-huh.
Michael Lombardo?
Numenmaa,
Yeah, the one with lots of,
sorry.
yeah,
Numenmaa,
it's got like a
Okay.
lot of M's and N's, yeah, in its name.
Laurie, it's a guy, Laurie, Numen, something.
Okay.
But he does a lot of this in Europe. Typical individuals with autism traits.
Yeah, I don't know of any who have also pubertal data. I mean, that was the grant I tried to write and never got funded, so I don't know if anyone has done it since.
What do you think it like came down to for that grant?
It was measurement stuff.
It was, because I read it
Oh, yeah,
a
I
few
sent it
times,
to
but
you.
I just, it was like, I don't, like, there's nothing you can do about the measurements.
Yeah, we said we would do saliva, and then they're like, no, we have to do blood, and we would also do the Tanner stages.
Right.
So then we said we do saliva, blood, and Tanner stages, and then they're like, what if they all tell you different things, which is true, like they will all.
They will all
Yeah.
probably tell you.
Exactly.
That is the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They tell the same thing, Mike, like, oh.
Well, that's the problem. So, and then I never bothered with it because we got our cognitive flexibility autism grant, and I was like, screw puberty. Yeah, so I was like, I just didn't bother with it again because I didn't want to have 2 R1s at a time. Because I don't want to manage 2 grants at a time.
Yeah, yeah.
But so, yeah, we just never resubmitted it. And then I suppose we could have, but I just
Mhm.
never got around to it. And
Yeah.
since then, so many things have changed in the field, like they probably would have wanted a larger sample size. They might, then there's also the male female issue. So in autism, because there's so much fewer females, it'd be really hard to get a big sample of autism females and then all the puberty stages and stuff. So
Oh, man.
the male female thing is a real big wrench in all of this because obviously the pubertal hormones are different in males
Yeah.
and females, so you
Yeah.
like really have to do them both.
Right.
But in autism, there's like this preponderance of males, so it's really hard to get a big female sample. So
yeah.
I think maybe those. were
Which I
some
feel
issues.
like is actually really unfortunate because there are so many menstrual issues and abnormalities and symptoms that are especially exacerbated during menstruation for females.
Yeah.
So it's like that, I feel like is pretty I looked at some occupational therapy work just showing that like puberty for individuals with ASD, especially those who are low functioning, is very stressful because they don't know what's happening.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
And what actually ends up happening is a lot of folks or their doctors end up putting them on birth control to
even it out.
or to just cancel out.
There's so much
Period.
leakage with that too, and it
Oh,
can
yeah.
alter
Yeah.
your reward centers.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like
hormonal
several
patients
patients that
Hmm.
thought they were dying when they got their first.
Oh my gosh.
They had no understanding.
Those-
They had
scary for
autism? Are they all?
Yeah, and thought they were
Yeah.
dying because there was so much blood.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's very, it becomes traumatic for them almost, and then for the families even more so. So then a lot of people just get on birth control and then they don't have periods, and then that also probably affects their development.
And they could give them a lower affect over time as well, a flatter affect.
Exactly,
So
because
then
of
it
all
could
that.
create more ASD
Oh.
traits over time.
Yeah.
Well,
that's
these
so
are all
true.
the kinds of things reviewers are going to bring up. good that you're thinking of them. I think like as difficult as it is, what you have to show the reviewers that you've thought of this. So like,
Yeah.
I know this is gonna be a problem. I've thought of this. I know this is my first pass. Here's my backup plan, that
Mhm.
kind of stuff.
Mhm.
It's gonna be a lot.
Reason you chose the same as network.
The-
They should be justified.
why I chose the Salience Network
Why
in
puberty
particular.
and the same as-
Yeah, I think for me, what I realized is that there's more work on like these other brain networks, like the default mode network and the central executive network and its association with puberty. But I haven't seen any papers looking at the association between puberty and the salience network. And I think I guess my argument here is that there are a lot of regions in the salience network that are really active and relevant for different goal-directed behaviors in adolescence. So I was curious to see whether that was associated first in like typically developing individuals and then looking at those with ASD traits. Yeah,
Yeah, I think they're gonna want to just
for that now.
over and above all your sources.
Yeah,
So try to think about how you're gonna
yeah,
sell that,
yeah,
why puberty and why does that
Mhm.
the related stuff.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
had that question in my
That's a
grant
really good
reviews
point.
and I think I had to like write a bunch
I
about.
think you might get it. So
mhm,
how does puberty influence the salience network's relationship with
right,
the other two big networks?
right. But why, yeah, versus just the salience network on its own.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you assume puberty is gonna affect the whole brain, right?
Mhm.
And then the salience network as sort of a hub, I think
Yeah.
you have a better justification
Yeah, yeah,
for looking at that. And then the sleep too, like why would sleep influence the salience network?
specifically. Yeah, yeah.
Daylight reasons.
Yeah, no, you're right. And honestly, that was definitely something that while I was making this, I felt like that was kind of one of my gaps. And I actually noticed too in one of your grant reviews, they were like, we feel like the puberty and the salience network question isn't like answered yet.
Right.
But then I was like, but yeah, you're right. I mean, just because it hasn't been done before
Right.
is not a good enough reason to ask
Right.
why, but
A model or mechanism.
Yeah.
or-
Right.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll try to think about that and make that a little bit stronger, or if not, then think about instead, like, how is it related to connectivity with other
Because
relevant.
if you just sit within the salience network and the salience network and including other stuff, then you kind of cover. You
Yeah,
have to justify, oh, why the salience network in isolation.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Or you could just, say like it's been used for classification and there's like my paper and two others that show you can do like better classification with salience than others.
Like
But
some kind of.
yeah, if you use
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
then that's a good justification.
Yeah.
There's 3 papers.
And certainly if the justification has like, from like a justification using neurobiology, justification using clinical phenotyping, justification using pubertal phenotyping, that's gonna be a way better justification than any of those individuals.
Yeah, in isolation. Yeah, I like that. That's a good point.
And also like given the gender ratio difference.
Mhm.
So in the animal model, they kind of like induce autism in rat models and stuff.
Uh-huh,
So if in case like you can find those studies to back up, like, we need to study this in humans.
yeah,
So it's like a lot easier to induce autism in rats, in males and females both, so it becomes easier to say.
yeah,
That's if in
Yeah.
case.
yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I actually haven't, I don't know why, but I haven't actually thought to look at the animal model work in ASD, but I'll go
Because
check it
your
out.
coursework really, it makes me think about it.
I'm sure, yeah. Well, great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been very grateful and helpful.
Good luck. Let us know. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Zoom people.
See you all next time. I'm not sure if we're having the lab meeting next week, but everyone posted.